how this happened came from the changing of the foundation of the church, which is built upon prophets and apostles. Besides, there were many things that happened after the death of the apostles. One such thing is the changing of the name of the church. In 110 AD, Ignatius of Antioch began using the title the Catholic Church. Why? Because the church consistently bore the name of its master. From the churches of Christ salute you to the Church of the Living God, if the changing of the name of the church and changing the foundation of the church from apostles and prophets to bishops who even claim that they do not have the same authority as the apostles should really throw into question how true the nature of there is no apostasy can even take place. Yo, Latter-day Dragon here. That's right. Today we're going to be talking about the Great Apostasy. Not only was there a great apostasy after the time of Jesus Christ and the death of the apostles, there have been multiple apostasies throughout time. An apostasy is a reoccurring pattern where it's just a departure from God's truth. One such apostasy that happened before the time of Jesus Christ happened under the Deuteronomist reworking underneath King Josiah. You probably have heard from them from biblical scholars such as the Josiah Reformers or the Deuteronomists. These reformers abandoned the ancient covenant by rewriting their history, which is why we have Deuteronomy 2 Chronicles as one insertion after the Babylonian exile, which allowed for them to remove books and remove things that prophets have said. This era fulfilled the warning Isaiah gave. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. These reforms marked the beginning of the famine described in Amos 8:11. I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. This was the first great vanishing act of Scripture. The Bible's own text lists books and writings we just simply do not have. One such example of a book that is referred to is the book of the generations of Adam, which is listed down in Genesis, but we do not actually have the book of generations. Books that are just mentioned offhandedly include things such as the book of the wars of the Lord, the book of Jasher, the book of the Acts of Solomon, the Acts of Samuel the seer, Nathan the prophet, and Gad the seer, the prophecy of Isaiah and the visions of Edu the seer, the Acts of Shemaiah the prophet. Oh, look at that, Edu again. The Acts of Jehu, son of Hanai, the Acts of Uzziah by Isaiah the prophet. Heck, we don't even have the sayings of seers. To think that the Old Testament isn't missing things said by ancient prophets is just wrong, because in Matthew it says that the prophets said the Messiah would be called a Nazarene. It says that Enoch prophesied the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints. Heck, Jesus Christ even said, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. This doesn't sound like a great thing. It also doesn't make sense to claim the Bible is infallible and perfect with books such as these missing, just from the Old Testament alone. Besides, missing things prophets have said in the Old Testament, as stated by the apostles, should really raise an eyebrow into the Old Testament. Besides, the people who were the religious elite during the time of Christ were the same people who made these reforms. To say the New Testament doesn't face this is just blatantly wrong. We don't have the 40-day teachings after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, where he was speaking of the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. Besides that, we don't have the first epistle that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, what really should be a first Ephesians, and we don't even have a letter to the Macedonians. Now, these are just books that are missing from the canon as stated within the canon. If these books can just be removed, fulfilling Nephi's prophecy that plain and precious truth shall be removed from the Bible, it really supports the fact that an apostasy did, in fact, happen. How this happened came from the changing of the foundation of the church, which is built upon prophets and apostles. Besides, there were many things that happened after the death of the apostles. One such thing is the changing of the name of the church. In 110 AD, Ignatius of Antioch began using the title the Catholic Church. Why? Because the church consistently bore the name of its master. From the churches of Christ Salute You, to the Church of the Living God, to the Church of the Firstborn. If the changing of the name of the church and changing the foundation of the church from apostles and prophets to bishops who even claim that they do not have the same authority as the apostles should really throw into question how true the nature of there is no apostasy can even take place. If you really think that I'm pulling this out of nowhere because I'm a Latter-day Saint who believes in the apostasy, Joe Heschmeyer says this.
So when we talk about the great apostasy, we're not saying that there was no body of believers. The entire great apostasy narrative is ultimately about the institutional church and what happened to that in history, and the fact that it doesn't have a continual existence. And I would posit this, and this is why I wouldn't say that I'm denying the antecedent here. Okay. I'm saying the only other reasonable option out there for an institution that goes all the way back to Peter, that holds his same authority and keys, the only one I know that even claims to hold those kind of keys is the Catholic Church. And so the apostasy is fundamentally about the loss of that and the results of what happens when that sort of authority is lost.
Let's talk about that a little bit, if we may, because I think that we might be over-exaggerating the similarities between what we mean by the keys. Like, we would say the keys are to bind and loosen, so it's a doctrinal authority, not an authority to receive new revelation. Or it's the keys to the kingdom of heaven, but it's tied to the binding and loosening authority. Let me be more precise there, excuse me. So we would say there is this Petron authority with the keys, but this is not about the ability to receive new doctrine. So we specifically don't claim that Peter is, that Leo is an apostle in the way that Peter was an apostle, nor do we claim.
So you don't claim that he has the same sort of authority that Peter had.
Correct. It depends on what we mean by authority. There are some things where we don't claim that he is an apostle in the same sense.
Well, if Latter-day Saints believe that you have an apostasy when you lose the fullness of the authority that was held by Peter, then wouldn't that be almost like an admission to an apostasy by our definition? If that authority is
precisely, like, if you're right about what constitutes an apostasy biblically, then it would just be when the 12 apostles die, like, definitionally, because as a matter of history, nobody's out there claiming that the 12 apostles appointed anyone else as apostles.
Now, the Catholic Church is one of the most oldest churches. It is older than the Orthodox Church, but is probably just as old as the Ethiopian Church. I'm going to list things that the Catholic Church added or changed the doctrine thereof. Some such examples include the Council of Arles in 314 AD, a policy was adopted that any baptism, even by a non-member, was effective. The reason given was to, quote, open the door more widely to salvation, close quote. The problem is, men do not have the power to open the door wider than Christ established. He gave the prophets and apostles the authority to go out and baptize. Baptism is underneath the authority of those who are considered priests, meaning the common man who is not ordained as a priest should not be able to baptize because they do not have the proper authority. Besides, without the keys of revelation and the leading and directing of the church began to preach for filthy lucre instead of a willing mind, fulfilling the prophecy in 2 Peter 2, 1-3. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, they promulgated a creed defining God as a substance rather than a being. Heck, the Athanasian Creed states God is incomprehensible, meaning he's an incomprehensible mystery. Why? If you're an incomprehensible mystery and God's incomprehensible, it means you cannot know him. This blatantly contradicts John 17:3. Besides, it's not like we were warned against Greek philosophy. Right? Besides, I I would like you to consider the timeline of the changes that constitute the death blow to the claims of papal infallibility. Not only is it a death blow to the claims of papal infallibility, it's also a death blow to anyone who truly ever wants to claim that there was no great apostasy. As I go through and list these, I will show what date it happened. The prayers for the dead instituted, the dress of the clergy, the worship of saints, worship of the Virgin Mary, the habit of nuns, the doctrine of purgatory, the supremacy of the Pope, blessing the Pope's feet, the imposition of religious images, the burning of holy candles, forced celibacy of the priest, use of the rosary, sale of indulgences, the transubstantiation and the Acliquer confession, the doctrine of surrogation claiming the Pope could dispense a, quote, treasure merit, close quote, from the saints to forgive the crimes of others. The book of the Apocalypse was added into the canon when they didn't have the authority to do so, because they do not have the authority to lead, guide, and direct the church. The Immaculate Conception, the dogma of the infallibility of the Pope, the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. Each of these things that I just mentioned represents a departure from the everlasting covenant and the words of the Lord, proving that the need for a total restoration of the original foundation of the church to bring us back to what the original message was. Heck, the creedal church even suppressed doctrines. They suppressed the ancient doctrine of deification, that man might become like God. Early church fathers taught this boldly, such as Saint Athanasius, Saint Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Saint Gregory, Saint Maximus. Heck, scriptures that even support this are found here. Besides, Jesus Christ said to the Pharisees and Sadducees, "Is it not written in your law, I said ye are gods?" Not only that, we are told that we are children of God and joint heirs with Christ. Peter says we could become partakers of the divine nature, and God permits anyone who overcomes to be able to sit with him in his throne. Besides, the creedal church forced the notion of God created everything out of nothing. This main belief from the Catholic Church comes from I believe it comes from Second Maccabees, but it does come from Maccabees, regardless, where it says that God created everything out of nothing. The issue is, in the Hebrew, it just says God created everything from a state of non-being. Whether or not something's in a state of non-being has everything to do with if it is functional and organized. If it's not, then it's in a state of non-being, which actually then supports what is taught in Genesis, that God didn't create everything out of nothing. He created the heavens and the earth by organizing it. Besides, it's really important for people to understand that God can't do whatever he wants, because he's not outside of time and space. He has to work with what he is given. I'm not out here wanting to completely disregard anyone's own personal beliefs. The issue is that when things such as the nature of God are changed in the creeds, which contradict what the scriptures say, and if people want to get so upset at the fact that Latter-day Saints believe that everything is eternal, they must completely ignore Genesis. This everything is eternal wasn't something that originated in Greek philosophy. The Trinity did, and it was rooted in the philosophy of Plato's The One. This is well documented by biblical scholars. For more information on the Great Apostasy and the Church's stance on it, I would recommend go checking out the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.org.